Welcome back to our lessons on negotiating and negotiating across cultures. Before we move on, I'd just like to take a little bit of time to go through some very important facts about negotiating. Some of these you may know, but I'd like to use them just to impress upon you once again. When negotiating, there are certain facts that are extremely important. First up, you are negotiating all the time. No matter whether we are negotiating in our private lives or our professional lives, all the time we are negotiating. So what does that mean? That means that we have skills in us to be able to bargain and find ways to gain something. It is actually quite a natural thing for us to negotiate. So the fact that every day of our lives we are trying to gain something that's not ours helps us actually develop and become very skillful in negotiation. For example, you may be having a discussion with your brother and he wants to have channel 5 on and you want to have channel 7. Even in that simple situation, you find that you are negotiating. Maybe your brother is difficult to negotiate with, I'm not sure, but you will find that you are using the skills of persuading somebody, influencing them, bargaining with them, discussing with them, or you are actually controlling and taking over what they want to do. You will find that you are negotiating in some way in very simple situations. Even in your office, it may be that one part of the room likes the temperature at 25 and the other part of the room likes it at 20. In order to reach a final agreement, what do? Do you march up and take the controls of the air conditioner and walk away and just put it on what you want? No. In many ways, you have to negotiate. You have to talk to your colleagues. You have to work out who wants what and come up with the best solution. So in your personal lives, there is always negotiation. And in your business lives also, you are negotiating. And then you plan for those more serious and major negotiations as a part of your role. The next fact, the second fact about negotiating is that everything you want is owned or controlled by someone else. It is not there just for you to take. So what does that mean? It means that you have to pay attention to the other party. Because what you want is not yours, then you have to find ways of going through the other party to get what you want. Not everything is given to you on a plate. That means that you have to work hard, you have to discuss, and you have to try to find ways to gain what you want. Because not everything you want is yours. Third, in every negotiation, there are always responses and replies that you can predict and you can count on. This is a given factor. There will always be the people who jump up and down and say that they're not happy. There are always will be the nice greetings and the nice hellos and how people want to work together. There will always be caring for each other in the opening speeches, perhaps. There will always be predictable responses. And you have learned these from your experience, and they are there. So if there will always be the predictable responses that you can count on, that means that there will too be the unpredictable ones. Don't forget that. Not everything is going to be as predictable as you think. people will come up with different responses that you thought they would come up with. So even though there are the predictable, usual responses people will come up with, there are always those that will not be predictable. And they're the ones to watch out for. In every negotiation, there are 3 factors that come up. Power. Who has the power? Which side has the power? Your side or the other side? This is a critical factor. And this is something that when you go into that meeting room, that you will begin to assess immediately you walk in the door. Where is the power? Is the power with them or is the power with us? Who has the upper hand, we say? Who is the controlling party? Where is the power? Where is the power amongst their members? Who does the power for decision-making lie with? Also, information. Information is critical to any negotiation. As I said before, if you go in blind without your correct information, then your negotiation will fail. It will be very, very difficult. And you may come away with nothing. So, power is very critical, to know the power base in the negotiation procedure. Information, to have all the information, is also critical. And time. The time it takes to reach certain stages of the negotiation. The timing of discussions. The time is a critical factor as to how people behave, how people want to continue, whether there's not enough time, how they will make decisions will be based on the time that is given to discussions, the time that is given to the agreement process. And finally, another fact about negotiations is that there is a proper mesh of personality types that are important in the process. We've been through that in the past lesson, and as we proceed further with this lesson and others, you'll get to understand the different mesh, the mesh of different personalities that come together in the process. Right now, you are probably thinking about your style and your personality type. I do hope that you know it quite well. If you do, then you are to first base in terms of understanding people of other cultures. Because once you understand yourself and your style, then you are able to understand other people more clearly. So we have some basic negotiating facts that sometimes need to be re-emphasized so that when you're negotiating, you have got everything clear in your mind about what you are up against. So, learning your opponent's goals is one of the next most important things you can do, and stating what you want. Learning what they want, learning what you want, and stating it. This is a very important first stage of a negotiation. Being very clear, having all the information, as we mentioned in the previous slide, having all the facts will help you to be able to state what you want. Here you have done your preparation, so you are clearly able to walk into that room and state what you want. Next up, find out information about your opponent and his or her needs. Quite often, I have seen executives go into negotiation processes and they haven't actually found out information about the actual person they're talking to. They may have found out about what the other party wants, and they may have found out information on the other party, the company structure, the profile of the company, etc. But it's also important to do some research and gather some information about the other person, your opponent, so we say. Information such as whether they're a family person, whether they have worked in many different other similar companies in the past, how long they may have been involved in this organization, whether they are seen as a very active managing director or negotiator. There's all sorts of different information that you can find out about that person. You can do it through different means. You can Google now on the internet, and you can find out for more prominent people, you can find out information about them. You can certainly Google companies and find out information about the structures, their values, their goals, their vision, their mission, what their product line is, and look at the promotional clips, look at their business development sites on their actual, you can certainly Google companies and find out all sorts of information about the structure of the company, where the company is headed, what their vision, their mission, what their values are. And when you do that, you gain a greater understanding of the opponent that you're about to meet. You gain more insights into the corporate culture of that company. So gathering information on your opponent is one way that you can walk into that room with some confidence and with a certain level of focus as to achieving the aims that you want to achieve. You don't walk in there blindfolded. You've got information that can help you see, and it prepares you for the next step. Of course, remember that there are things that are expected and are stated, and there are also unpredictable things that are not expected and will come to you in the process. But if you have information on your opponent and what they need beforehand, then you can feel a lot more confident in the process. You also gather information along the way. That is the best way to actually find the real information. So in terms of preparing ahead of time, you can do that. But along the way, you will find more details out about what is needed. And the third stage of negotiation is when you reach for compromise. After all the discussion, all the debate, you reach for compromise. And that's when you start to make your agreements clear. So negotiation certainly is a process indeed. It's not really just walking in, shaking hands and signing a deal. It is a long process of engagement that goes through particular steps. You may have had much experience in negotiation, or maybe not, but certainly if you are looking to be a skilled negotiator, if you are looking to transfer your skills into the international arena of business, where there are certainly some very different ways of negotiation and tough negotiations to be considered, then it would pay to try to become very skillful. And to bring you up to date with some of the capabilities of skilled negotiators, let's just take a look at how they manage negotiations. They think things through and they consider twice as many options and outcomes. This means they have a plan in their mind, not to accept just one outcome. No, that's not what they do. They have several outcomes in their mind as to what they will accept. So they have twice as many, or perhaps a few more, options as to what they're ready to come away with. If they only go in there with one option, it could be that if the negotiations do not proceed well, then they won't be able to gain that option and therefore they lose everything. If they walk in there with 2 or 3 as possible outcomes, of course in order of priority, then there is more chance that they will come out with an outcome, with a result. So, skilled negotiators, they consider twice as many options and outcomes. Next, and you may find this a bit difficult if you're a very Next, and you may find this difficult if your schedule is very busy, or if you find that your time management is lacking a little. You need to spend 3 times as much attention on finding common ground in the negotiation. You need to be able to take time to go through things, not rush it. Put more attention on finding ways where you can collaborate and work together. Don't just rush off as soon as something is not agreed. Skilled negotiators invest in the time to sit and talk. Quite simple. Skilled negotiators don't sit and look at their watch when things get tough because they're getting hungry. They sit and they pursue and persevere. And this means that they spend 3 times as much attention on finding common ground, trying to find ways where both parties can share, both parties collaborate and cooperate and agree. That's actually what an executive is paid to do. It could be easy just to get up and walk away because you feel you don't want to persevere and have to give all the effort. But actually, as an executive and a senior manager in your company or organization, your responsibility is to come away with that final outcome that is win-win. And what does that mean? Spending the time to get there. No matter how long it takes, spending the time to get there. And spending 3 times as much attention on finding common ground as you would normally do. Another issue about time, spend more than twice as much time on long-term issues. Investing time in long-term is the secret to successful negotiations and indeed the secret to successful business relationships. So long-term gain is going to bring back regular and repeat clients and customers and business partners. Of course, there are short-term issues that need commitment too, but when you're looking for very long-term benefit, then you do need also to expend the time on that. Nothing can ever be built so quickly in a day or two if you want to have years and years and years of very solid and firm relationships and business benefit. So dedicate the time to that point. It's an investment for the long-term gain. Skilled negotiators also look at multiple objectives sometimes, objectives that link to another, so that the range is greater rather than single point objectives. They are looking at maximum gain, and through their skillfulness and their ability to view things in that way, then they will set objectives that link with others, that provide a range of services or a range of products so that they are coming out more win-win and coming away with more outcome. And once those objectives and once those issues are set, then particular attention should be placed on discussion of each issue, rather than confusing them or marrying them with others. So each issue has the benefit of serious discussion, and that there is clarity in every respect of that issue, so that there is nothing missed and there is nothing left out. Skilled negotiation. This is where you aim to be. Skilled in negotiation, so that when you meet business partners, not only here at home, but when you meet partners you've never met before in other countries, that you will be able to know the way that they may be looking at negotiation, and that you yourself need to look at your skills and develop them so you are prepared to be able to discuss things at the negotiation table internationally. So we have your objectives, as you well know. The issues that are at hand, you need to set clearly. You need to understand the relationship costs of your negotiations and the transaction costs. All of these very standard matters need to be in your mind. Clear objectives as to where you're going, how much things cost, not only physically, but also emotionally in terms of relationships. And planning is very key to coming away with great outcomes. In many overseas countries, a lot of time is spent in the planning stages. Sometimes we tend to rush planning because we feel we have no time. Sometimes we tend to put it to the side as a secondary matter of priority rather than a priority. If your planning is in place, if everything is in order, if you have, first of all, identified all of the issues, if you have prioritized those issues, and if you have established how you're going to settle, what is your limit and what you will settle on first, second, third or fourth, and if you have developed the strategies and the tactics to be able to settle those, then your planning is well in place. And of course, the most important part of the negotiation process is knowing about people. It's all very important to have all your facts and figures in place, all your research, all of your proposal matters, everything in place. However, the most important thing is to know about people. So, who are the decision makers in that room? Who will make the final decision on what you're trying to negotiate? Find out who that person is first, and find out a little bit more about them. So who are the decision makers? Maybe you are also a decision maker, and it could be that your other party is going to find out about you as well, whether you are a decision maker or not. So find out who are the decision makers. Perhaps there are 2 or 3 in different aspects of whatever the subject is you are negotiating. So find out who your decision makers are. Next up, who are the key influential people? The key people who can influence how the negotiation process goes may not necessarily be the decision makers. The key people who decide whether something happens or not and who can influence the process may be someone that you totally do not expect. So in order to do this, you need to work through the process of the negotiation and listen and watch and learn to understand the behaviours of the people across the table from you. You may like to confer with your colleagues at some stage during a break, perhaps during the process, and both decide, or the 3 of you, or however many there are of you, decide on who are the decision makers, who are the key influential people, unless you are able to already see that in the beginning. It's very important to know who is who. When you know who is who in the negotiation process, of course, you can then focus on certain aspects and revert certain matters to those people. You can then learn to use your strategy in the best possible way. Factors to know about people: special concerns. Are there any special concerns? Are there any special things about the people that you are dealing with? There are also cultural sensitivities to take into consideration. Apart from special concerns that may confront you, there may be cultural sensitivities of the other party that you need to be aware of. They could have visited your country, come a long way, and they are perhaps from Africa or they are from Japan, and dealing with other cultures is something that you are going to have to be very wary of and also regard very carefully. So before you actually start the process of the negotiation, find out what those sensitivities are. You may know some things about the other cultures, but try to find out more deeply if there are certain things that may offend or that may concern the other party. Key personnel will also be at the negotiation, and any information you can find out about them will help the process. And then try to understand other people's perceptions. Do people really regard your company very highly? You may think they do, or maybe this particular party that you haven't met yet may consider that there are some things about your particular company that have been in the newspaper that have caused them to think otherwise. These are things you need to be aware of. So you need to know what other people think about your organization. Do they think it is one of the top 500 companies in the country that people are vying for a position for? Do they think that you are in the top 5 IT booming companies in the country, and therefore you are a very creative kind of organization? Do they think that you have strong management, that your executive board is very go-ahead and is very future-oriented? Try to find out how they perceive your organization. Certainly in international countries around the world, we try to see, Certainly in the international business arena, there is a lot of footwork done in the beginning to try to find out how the other company is, what they do, who they are. And therefore, the other party in a negotiation is also trying to find out exactly the same thing about your side. So try to find out how people view your organization, and if there is any bias or any negative opinion about your particular company. So quite simply, you need to analyze, and your analytical skills will really come into play in negotiation. This you do know, but how good are you at analyzing? How good are you at going through every point in detail? Who are the people involved? Really analyze this very, very closely. And what are the issues to be settled? What are they? A, B, C, D. Or is it A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Where will we settle and negotiate? Where is the negotiation going to take place? Where? In our organization? Are we going to travel across the globe to our future partners' offices? Where is it going to take place? When is the best time to negotiate? If you indeed are going to travel across the globe to your business partner or future business partner, or even if you're going to travel anywhere, you do need to know what is the best time. You you do need to find out what is the best time to negotiate, and also, in terms of the day, what is the best time to negotiate. Some cultures really don't like to negotiate late afternoon. Some cultures don't like to have a long break for lunch. Some cultures like to get straight into it at 7:30 in the morning. For example, American cultures do like to have breakfast meetings and breakfast discussions. So you will have to look at the best time to negotiate, and we will go through those matters in a little bit more detail later in the lessons. Not everybody works to your time frame. So when you are setting up negotiations, it is very important that you consider the other party and try to work out the best possible time for all. Remind yourself, why negotiate this at all? Analyze deeply. Analyze all the time so that you are firm in your mind that what you're doing is the right thing, that where you're going is correct. So why negotiate this at all? Sometimes just ask yourself that question and prompt yourself to think about the answer. It brings you back to reality. Ask yourself, how will they negotiate this? Simple questions along the road as a guideline to help you prepare for your negotiation. How will I, or how will they negotiate this? And what if we tried this or something different? Analyze deeply the aspects of your negotiation. Look more closely at how you can get win-win. The best way to get win-win, or one of the best ways to get win-win, is certainly to prepare yourself. And prepare yourself before the process, of course, and during the process as well. Ask yourself all the time certain questions to keep you up to date, to keep you in line with what is happening and how to get that win-win outcome. Being an executive and being a senior manager requires a lot of skills, particularly when it comes to negotiating. And you will find that many of the skills that you have developed along the way as you've been in your particular role will come to the forefront when you begin to negotiate. If indeed you are an experienced negotiator, then it's always good to take time to refresh, to review, and look back at how you have been operating in the past. Look back at how you have been coming to the negotiation process and whether you can improve upon your skills before you indeed take on much larger, more major negotiation tasks. Hopefully this lesson will be able to help you see those things and see more clearly where your limitations are and where the areas for improvement are in your negotiation style. Gathering the information, as I have said before, is a certain part that we can't miss. We need to have information. And as you are talking with your party, as you are in the actual process, you can ask all sorts of things. You can gather information at that time as well as beforehand. You can repeat statements as questions, and in doing so, you are reinforcing information or gaining more information. You can ask people to respond. You can ask them, what do they think? Tell me, what's your take on this? Tell me, what do you feel about that? You can lighten up and you can ask for responses. We don't always have to have the information we need on paper. Information can be forthcoming from the conversations that you have with people in the room. So, one easy way of gathering information is just simply to ask. Ask people's opinions. Quite honestly, the other side will be asking you your opinions as well, and this is their way of gathering information. In some ways, beforehand, you can also ask other people who deal with your opponent or deal with the other party. As I said before, You can gain information this way, but be careful when you do this. This is a very sensitive issue, and certain things should remain confidential. So it's important that you are very subtle and that you ask the right people. To go and ask a number of people in an office about your coming discussions or the partner that you're going to discuss with is not very ethical or professional. But you can quietly ask others that you may know who deal with your opponent, past customers or existing customers or people who have had experience with the other party, and gently find out what they think of the other party. What do you think of them? How do they behave? Do they argue a lot? Etc., etc. You can gather information by asking the subordinates also of the opponent, of the person you're going to be meeting. And this could be in a formal way. Perhaps there is information that you need. You can mix your company specialists in the negotiating process with their specialists. Start to build some camaraderie. Start to get people of the same role or position talking with their counterparts on the other side. That way, people share information. People give information quite clearly, quite willingly, because they know that it's important to the negotiating process. People are actually quite happy to be asked questions and to give information, particularly when they know that the objective of this whole procedure, that the objective of this whole negotiation is to gain win-win, because ultimately both companies will benefit. And in asking questions, the type of question you would ask is what we call open-ended, where you just don't get a yes or a no as a response. You get an opinion or a sentence or an idea or a view of things as a response. So asking questions is a way of gathering the information you need, either prior to the negotiation or during the negotiation process. And there are many different ways to gather that information, formally and indeed informally, through people. So, we have you sizing up your opponent. This means that you are now gaining a very good picture of your opponent and what they think, what they look like, what they're likely to do. You are identifying the interests, and you are also exploring the options that you have so you can reach your final outcome. When you size up your opponent, when you get a clear picture of your opponent, you also get a very clear knowledge of the alternatives that you may have to look at. Remember, think of twice as many outcomes in the beginning if you are a skilled negotiator. So when you size up your opponent, you finally know the alternatives that you may have to use in that negotiation. When you gain a very clear picture of your opponent, then you can develop very sound or very proper ways of reasoning things through. You will know whether they are argumentative or whether they are very good at discussion, very fair at discussion. So then you will be able to develop a very fair way of reasoning and discussing with them because you know what they're like firsthand, beforehand. And all of this will help you understand the relationships that you have with them. You'll be able to understand how you can work together and how, through knowing the kind of relationships you've got with them, that you can come away from that negotiation with a very good product, with a very good outcome. it all helps in the negotiation process. And the aim of that negotiation is to come back home with a win-win outcome. To negotiation and negotiating across cultures. In this lesson, we're going to take a closer look at the business behaviors of different cultures. This is to give you an understanding of how to manage the way you negotiate at the negotiating table, especially when you're dealing with people of different countries and different cultures. Perhaps the first most important thing you may need to know is that people have a different focus. People from different countries look differently at the way negotiation should run. And sometimes this causes what we call a great divide between one culture and another. A great divide could be, for example, a huge mountain range that separates one country from another. So, if a culture is more focused on getting the deal done than focused on the relationship between the two parties, then this kind of orientation will set the tone for how the buyer or the partner will make the first approach. If there is this division in thinking, if there is this division in focusing on whether it's the deal or the relationship, then that can, as I say, set the tone for how things will run. For example, if we take a closer look here, we can see that there are cultures or countries where the deal is the main focus rather than building the relationship. Although relationships are important, the deal is the main focus. For example, countries such as North America, perhaps you have been dealing with people in New York or people in Los Angeles or somewhere in the States, in the North American states, where you find that they're very, very focused on the actual contract, on the actual substance of the negotiation. Other cultures also focus this way. Great Britain, for example, Australia and New Zealand, and certainly those countries in Scandinavia, the Norwegian countries, and Germanic Europe. This means that people and businessmen of those cultures tend to be very heavily focused on the subject matter, on the deal. There's less focus on the relationship. Next, we look at moderately deal-focused. Asian countries, such as Hong Kong and Singapore, are moderate in this regard. They focus on the deal and also they would swing towards the relationship as well. Central and Eastern Europe, India and Eastern European countries also would say that the deal is important, but also relationships are important as well. And in South Africa, they are also moderate in terms of this. But when you're looking at a country or a culture that is heavily focused on the relationship aspect of the negotiation, we will find that the Arab world and most of Africa comes into this category, where building the relationships, having long-term relationships, are of greater value than actually focusing on the deal first up. And at the bottom of that column, we can see that Asia is in there as well. Asia being very much family-oriented cultures, Asia also regarding building relationships as a very important aspect of any business arrangement. So this barrier, whether your partner across the table is focused on the deal or focused on relationships, is something that you need to be able to quickly assess and quickly know when you go to that negotiating table. For example, here in Vietnam, it's very heavily the fact that relationships are important. It's very heavy on that. And speaking from my own personal experience, I found that in a negotiation process here, that it's important that relationships and family are talked about, etc., and that parties don't directly jump in to have discussions. There's always the opening, there's always the greeting, there's always sitting down and having a bit of a chit-chat first and developing the relationship along the way. So this is a most important aspect when you're dealing with partners of other cultures. Try to establish, where are they focused? Are they focused on the deal mostly? Or are they moderate in terms of that and focus on the deal and the relationship they want to develop? Or are they heavily focused on the relationship? And the deal is important too, but not as prominent in their mind as the relationship. Other business behaviors from other cultures will also include whether one culture is very formal or one culture is very informal. Once you can identify this, then you can work out how you yourself will behave towards the people of that culture. Sometimes cultures have very sensitive patterns within their framework of how they behave, and if you are not careful and if you don't give due consideration to the other culture, then there is a possibility that you may offend them. And once you've offended them, then you've got to backtrack and you've got to make up for that offense in some way if you can. So the best step to take is to find out which cultures are very formal and which cultures are informal. As a guideline, we can see, for example, that very informal cultures are those of Australia and New Zealand and the US and Canada. Saying that means that there's an openness, an easiness about greeting and about conducting business. It doesn't mean that business is easier as such, but there is an easiness about it. The formalities are not as strict, and therefore discussion can flow perhaps a bit more freely. I know I'm Australian. In Australia, we are very informal. We're very friendly. We're very naturally warm to people. We also do regard the deal, but perhaps we don't overemphasize the fact that contracts and strictness should be followed in a formal way. We rather like to relax and to get to the proceedings and get them done in a good fashion in an informal sense, but with a professional sense as well. Formal cultures, if we can explore those cultures a little bit more, we may see that most of Europe and Asia tend to be formal. We could say quite easily, as an example of that, is Japan, with its strict formalities in terms of greetings, in terms of the procedures, the undertakings, the way things are done. Their culture is a very formal one. And certainly other cultures in Asia do tend to follow along that way as well. And also in the Arab world, we can also see that there are certain protocols and formalities that do need to be addressed in that part of the world as well. So these cultures adopt a more formal approach to the way that they conduct business. Formal meaning proper steadiness, strict following of rules, and set behavior in the negotiation process. Informal meaning a more relaxed approach, not meaning that it is not professional, but the approach is in a more relaxed way than a formal culture. Think about yourself as we go through this. Think about you, your nationality, your culture, and where you fit in, how you fit in, and start to identify the various areas of your own culture that you can see quite clearly and know them, because this will help you when you're meeting other parties. The third aspect that tends to have an impact on the way cultures behave in business negotiations is how people view time. There can be time that is, we say, rigid time and fluid time cultures. Rigid time cultures mean that they put a lot of emphasis on time, on the fact that time is important, time makes money, time is considered a very necessary part of good proceedings, keeping to time, making sure things are done in a timely way. And then we have fluid time cultures. In these cultures, people tend to be more relaxed about time. They are not so concerned if things are not done to the second or to the minute or to the hour. In fact, they consider that time will take its role, time will play its role. It's more important that the people around them have the focus rather than the time, and the time will catch up. So we see in a rigid time culture that these cultures, in a way, worship the clock. They pay close attention to the clock. Fluid time cultures are more relaxed about it. But sometimes that can drive people crazy, drive some cultures crazy, because they may not understand it or may not feel comfortable with it, and vice versa. If we look at our examples, we can see that very rigid time cultures are headed up by the North American states. Japan is way up there, and also the Nordic and Germanic Europe. These cultures do adhere very closely to time, and time is a very important aspect of how they live their daily lives and how they run their business. To some of the people from these cultures, being late or being lax about time is considered not very professional if you are doing any business at all with them. So it may pay for you to take close note, depending on where you are from and your culture, to be mindful of those cultures that are very strict about time and for whom time is very, very important. Next level down is a group of countries where time is important, but it's not as important as, say, the first group we discussed. There are allowances given, but time still is important. In Australia, yes, that's absolutely true. In New Zealand, Russian countries, Hong Kong, Singapore and China, and Southern Europe. Time does need to be kept. Time needs to be regulated, but not as closely regulated as in the first group. In Australia, for example, we are quite willing to forgive if somebody's late for a meeting sometimes, generally. But we also wish that people are not too late, because we would not really care too much for that either. So the best rule to adopt with this second group of countries is to be on time. To be on time. They will allow for some lateness, but generally they do like to be on time. And then finally we come to other cultures where time is really not as essential as the first or second group. It will happen, time will play a part, but it is not as important as in the first two groups. You can be a little bit more lax about time in these groups, the Arab world, Africa, and Latin America. Next we come to how different cultures express emotions. Some cultures are very, very expressive. They have no problem speaking, relaxing, talking easily being very friendly, being very, very verbal. And the way they move, the way they walk is very, very friendly and very informal and very easy for them to do. Perhaps they might hug somebody, or perhaps they might kiss somebody more easily than someone who is rather reserved. So we have expressive cultures and we have reserved cultures. And this can be in all forms of communication. Sometimes you might be a bit confused by the way that different cultures represent themselves or look or behave. And certainly I'm sure you can think of many instances where you've looked at somebody from somewhere else and you really have no idea what they're thinking or no idea what they're going to do or no idea what they feel, because you can't see much from their expression or their body language. Non-verbal communication has the greatest impact on any human being than any other form of communication. It's communication without words, and it involves a whole different set of behaviors. It can be the way you look at somebody. It could be the way that you smile or not smile. It could be what you do with your hands, whether you pull your ear or whether you scratch your head or whether you stand like this. Non-verbal communication is very, very powerful, and sometimes it can add to the words that are spoken and make those words much more meaningful. So we have certain cultures who are very expressive with words, expressive with body language, expressive with their facial features and the way they move and their behaviors. Then we have the opposite, some cultures who are very reserved. And we really have very little idea what they're thinking and what they're feeling at the same time. We can see that reserved cultures, where it is difficult to see what they're feeling or thinking, fall in the East and Southeast Asian countries, as well as Nordic and Germanic Europe. We could say that it could be difficult to know how anybody from those cultures is really thinking if you just look at them. So in a negotiation situation, you would have to begin to talk more. You would have to try to build relationships and try to understand more about those people in order to find out underneath what they are thinking and what they are feeling. We have, on the other side of the slide, we have very expressive cultures. And these are people who are very easy to excite, perhaps easy to show their feelings. They perhaps give a lot of hugs and kisses when they see people, big handshakes, pats on the shoulder, very expressive and willing to express very quickly. People from Mediterranean, Latin Europe and Latin America, of course. And we can see that a lot of this does actually come from, for example, their dance culture. We can say Latin America particularly, where people love to dance and move and they are very expressive naturally. So you will find in business meetings that executives from these countries would be more inclined to talk a lot, express their feelings, be open, not be shy, and come out and say what they want to say. Then we come down to the variably expressive. This is the middle road where people from USA, Canada, for example, are quite easy to show their feelings. Australia, New Zealand, and Eastern Europe, and South Asia and Africa. Very, very middle road, reserved a little bit sometimes, but most of the time, and depending on the situation and how they feel, they will be able to express themselves quite openly and quite easy for you to see and to be able to read what they're thinking. So how do we negotiate when we're with other cultures? How do we negotiate? We are all from different places, and some of us share, and some of us have common behaviours, and there are those among us who have quite different behaviours. So when it comes to negotiating and sitting down across a table in a meeting room, how do we begin to negotiate? Basically, there are three things that we can do. We can use our knowledge of those different executives. We can use our basic knowledge, and we can, through understanding where they're from and studying up a bit on behaviour patterns and the ways that they may view business, in studying up on that, we need to reduce prejudice. Your knowledge of these matters will reduce prejudice, and it will stop you thinking, he's different from me, or he's less than me because I'm from here and I'm different. Or maybe you might be thinking, I'm better. These are traps that we fall into when we come across people from other countries that we've never really met before and we don't really understand. We automatically start to judge and become prejudiced. So in order to get moving in the negotiation process, accept, yes, that person is different. He's different from me. But he's also an executive. He's also here dealing and working for his company. So therefore, in some ways, we are quite equal. So you need to look at the positive aspects of the differences that exist. But you also need to understand that you share certain professional matters and that you are both executives with the same aims to negotiate for a win-win outcome. So, first up, reduce your prejudice. Start to be fair. Next up, use more effective communication. That will help you build respect and more understanding. And effective communication, which we will go through a little bit later in the program, means that you have to begin to think of the other person and try to think of the best possible way to get your message across clearly without any misinterpretation. Also, you can use a variety of approaches, and you can always challenge the right way of doing things by changing your approach. You don't need to stick so stringently to the rules. If a situation requires that you modify the way you approach the other party, then do so. There are always other ways to approach someone if the right way, which is written down, doesn't work. So always challenge that and look for ways of approaching the other party which are comfortable to you and comfortable to them. In communication, there are two parts. There's the way that you speak, of course, as you well know, and then there is listening. So in order to begin to understand people from other cultures, you're going to have to improve your listening ability and adopt active listening skills. Active listening is a way of reaffirming what you have heard, being active in hearing what is said. And we can begin that process by, first of all, placing yourself in the other person's shoes. When you do that, then you begin to realize what you are hearing and what you are seeing. Quite often we don't think of ourselves like that. We just go straight ahead and we talk and we expect the other person to know exactly what we're saying. But if you place yourself in their shoes, imagine you are them, then you may redefine the approach you're taking. Then you may reword what you are saying. So think of the other person at all times. If the difference is there in cultures, and if you really want to establish some firm relations to build on, they will know what you're doing. They will feel it. They will understand. People people are very, very sensitive to these matters. As human beings, we naturally try to sense if something is wrong or we need to work something out better. So people will appreciate you for doing this. Look at the situation as an outsider. Pretend you don't know anything and look at it as an outsider, and then you will find that you will really listen intently and that you will really seriously try to understand what is going on. Sometimes when we sit in a meeting and we know the process and know the procedures, we tend to switch off because we know it, because we don't put ourselves in the situation as an outsider. These little techniques will really help you hone your active listening skills and learn to understand more deeply the other side. It's always a good thing too to be patient at times and to be forgiving. Sometimes people on the other party may not really be able to speak so quickly. Maybe they will have to take their time to formulate a response because they're thinking a little bit differently to what you're thinking, or they're speaking differently to the way you are used to. So give them time. Be patient. If they need a few minutes to take a break to come back with you, then think about that. You may wish the same thing if you were them. So that comes back to putting yourself in the other person's shoes. When you do that, you can have greater understanding. And many times there may be mistakes that are made, mistakes that are perhaps not intentionally made, but just happen because of the differences that exist between the two cultures. So, a general rule of thumb, we say, which is a very good one to keep, is to be patient and to be forgiving as well, to a certain point. And listening, of course, is about hearing what has been said. If you repeat or you rephrase what has been said to you, you repeat and rephrase that back to the other party, then of course this can improve the situation and the communication. This will allow the other party to confirm through what you're rephrasing back to them all the information that has been said. Try not to make it too repetitive in the process or too awkward. If you keep a natural approach to this and a friendly approach to this, but being professional, then you will find that this kind of active listening will really help the negotiations that are going on. So listen actively. Sometimes you may need to use intermediaries. And actually this is very, very necessary in many negotiations where there is a lot of complex business going on. Now, intermediaries, they can help the situation very, very well. If you're familiar with both cultures, they can translate and they can do many, many things in that process. And they can adjust things that are being said so that everything is very, very clear at the same time. Problems that happen, however, is that if you don't have skilled intermediaries, or even if they are skilled, at times their way of behavior could create bias, or it could even increase miscommunication. So the main thing here with using intermediaries is to be familiar with them. Know them well, select them well. Don't leave it to the last minute to find a translator who will help you in a serious negotiation process. That translator will also need to be involved in the preparation and know the substance of the discussion. So this is one rule that unfortunately does tend to be lost. Whenever translators are used, they need to be selected very carefully. And they need to have a very good way about them. Also an attitude of positive behavior, a good friendly approach, but professional. And they do need to represent you well and look good at the same time. The translator must always adopt a similar appearance in terms of your style and the seriousness and the formality of your negotiations. So intermediaries can really assist you when you're dealing with different cultures, but there are certain things you must be selective about when choosing them. Some things to make it easier for you. Start to learn about cultures worldwide. Start to increase your knowledge. Learn from generalizations of culture. Pick up your ears. Keep your eyes open as to how different cultures greet and how they say goodbye and the way they might wave hello or things like that. Learn from these things that you see on movies, you see in your normal business dealings, you see in the street or when you're traveling. Start to pick up on all these things and really take notice of them. Sometimes, even if you can just say a greeting, 1 or 2 words in another language with the other party, then that opens all sorts of doors. People are more inclined to become friendlier and listen and try. So learn from the generalizations of different cultures. Who does what? You don't have to become a specialist, but you just have to have a very good general knowledge of certain behaviors. Next thing, just make things easier by practicing. Just practice how to talk with other people from different countries. Push yourself a little bit. Go out there, say something to somebody of another culture who doesn't speak English, for example. These are things you can do just in your own time when you're traveling. Have fun with it. Start to enjoy the differences. Start to realize that the differences make the world a much greater place. And so if you practice and practice and practice, you will become better and better and better. It's a very simple rule. So push yourself a little bit. Learn and then practice the different ways. Question the knowledge of the right way. As I said before, there are always other approaches that you can take. Don't always think that if you meet an Eskimo that you have to rub noses with him like this. There are other ways to say hello. Just as a simple, fun example, always look for other approaches. And sometimes just being yourself, just being a friendly person and an honest person and an open person will begin conversations, will begin a very warm relationship. A point that is very, very important to not do is to not assume that people understand you, or don't assume that people agree with you just because they can't respond back. People of other cultures may just sit quietly and wait. But quite often, if you are from an expressive culture, you may jump in and assume things too easily. So don't really assume anything. Wait until you can establish the proper road to communication to get all the details. And finally, honor others. Be respectful to other people. Showing people a little bit of respect will get you a very, very long way. Regardless of whether you agree on one point or another, or you don't agree, just show respect, and that will show that you are professional. That will show that you have an international ability to be able to meet people from other cultures and to be able to try to go through the negotiation process in a professional manner. Honor others, respect others for who they are. Finally, and being an executive or being a senior manager, I am sure that in dealings that you have had with other cultures, you will probably remember the mistakes that you made along the way. You will probably remember that instead of being nice and talking about the family first, that you jumped right in and started to talk about points A, B, C on page 4 of the contract. And you'll probably remember that the party you were speaking to started immediately to ask you how your family is. These are mistakes that along the way, when we're doing business, we tend to make, and it's important that we learn from past mistakes. Continuing to make the same mistakes means you are not performing your role professionally. So remember, learn from the things that you have done in the past that you knew were wrong, and repeat the right way of doing things in the future. Things that can make negotiations easier across cultures is not to get defensive. Don't be offended. Don't start to stand up for yourself because something else is different. Or if a remark is made, don't take it as a personal insult. Sometimes remarks are made and they're very innocently made, but we know that they're not intentionally made. So don't get defensive. Don't rush and stand up and threaten to leave because of something that was said but was not intentionally meant to hurt or harm you. Be patient. Think things through and try to understand and listen actively. Across the table from you, you will see also that there may be differences in power amongst the different members of the groups. So acknowledge those. Just acknowledge them and then try to work your way through them. And remember, it is not only the culture that shapes an individual. An individual has many wonderful traits and personalities and characteristics, and sometimes the culture will affect the way a person behaves because we are brought up in that country, for example. But there is an individual underneath all of that. Underneath the clothes, you see, for example, there is an individual. People from different cultures, we wear masks and we look different. But actually, when you look under here, we are all flesh and blood. We are skin. We have emotions. But we are just framing them a little bit differently because we have been brought up in a different place. But there is an individual inside there. And there are lots of common things that you and I and you and the party that you are dealing with in your negotiations share as individuals. So once you have begun to understand that people come from all sorts of different places, that people wear different costumes, people wear different behaviors, but once you understand that underneath all that, in some ways we are quite the same, then we can begin to really develop relationships and begin to negotiate in a very professional and very rewarding way. I do hope that understanding behaviors of different cultures has given you a very good introduction into how you may proceed with any future negotiations you have. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.